You know, if the Great Recession did anything for us, it forced us to confront some very tough truths that we're going to have to deal with. I thought Warren Buffett summed it up best when he said, when the tide goes out, you find out who's swimming naked. And it turns out that a lot of segments of our society are swimming naked. And this is a classic case of something that has been building for some time and not enough people have been paying attention to it. We do require an entirely different skill set, not just in our workforce population, but also in our citizen population, and understanding what is going on around us so that we can bring some applied intelligence to dealing with it. So I really think that there are going to be two great movements in the 21st century. One is you're going to have much more regional and global cooperation on these kinds of issues between countries that may even be adversaries. And also you're going to have much more of a public-private effort going on to solve the problems that are inherent in our social and political structure. So I think what OECD is doing is an important first step in the right direction. I have never seen the gap between what goes on in Washington and what goes on in the country as wide as it is now. And now I hope that this downturn will begin to close that some. But and I tell this to Republicans and Democrats alike. I say the country's divided up into two parts. Half the country is half-cocked in the pissed-off position, and they don't want to hear anything from anybody. They're just in a race. The other half of the country gets up every day, opens the plant or goes to work in the plant, opens the bank, gets on the backhoe, opens the car dealership, services the car, and they worry about family, community, and their local economy. And they don't believe anything that they're hearing from the financial institutions on Wall Street or from Washington, D.C., because everything they've been told in the last 4 years has proved not to be true. Everything. And so they're just looking to themselves. And there's a lot of wisdom out there, by the way, in those communities and in those workforces. And what we need to do is to make it percolate to the top and grab the political structure by the throat and say, listen, you've got to pay attention here. I think, first of all, they don't having a full appreciation of the magnitude of the issue and the criticality of it in terms of trying to get something done about it. And secondly, I don't think that there's a full appreciation in a lot of areas of the motivation of the workers themselves and of the companies to try to find a way of solving this. I am constantly inspired and renewed by what I find out when I go out there. There are these really smart people who are finding solutions because they're forced to. And they also have a social conscience about how they're going to get it done. And a really productive workplace is something to behold, you know, where there are good conditions and they work together happily, and that's the fulfillment of the American dream.
The first and most important thing about any communication strategy is to make sure that you can break through the blizzard of information out there. A friend of mine, Joe Nye, wrote in an essay not too long ago that we live in an era with a plenitude of information but a paucity of understanding. So I think the first thing is to take this incredibly impressive project, which is going to survey so many people in so many countries, and generate some results that can actually have real impact on policymaking. And what we know from research is that audiences in the United States want practical solutions to problems. They're a little bit fed up with the gridlock that we have here in the United States, the failure to address some critical policy matters. So if someone can come along and point them towards strategies that can work, findings from this research that really point to what we have to do to raise the level of adult competencies for good citizenship and for economic growth, I think that will be very, very impressive to people. I think part of the work that PIAAC is going to do is to try to help citizens in all of these countries understand what it means to have competencies in some of these core areas, and we're going to want to see some demand for that. We want to see citizens really say, now that we have learned more about what it takes to be fully functional within these advanced societies, we need to have those tools made available to us because we want ultimately to be some outcome. I think that's something I think all the OECD countries would want to see as a result of this. I think one of the key things is to focus in on what are those things we are really trying to learn that point towards solutions, that point towards outcomes that will be of interest to policymakers here in the United States and around the world. I think it's very important in the design of a communication strategy to remember a couple of simple things. The information has to be very credible. We can't stretch the results or try to spin the results to achieve certain kinds of outcomes or perspectives. I think it has to stand on its own, and people need to see that it's fact-based and needs to be very candid. I mean, I think we're going to probably end up showing in certain societies that there are severe shortcomings in how we are training people to participate in the economy or participate as citizens in self-government. And so those learnings are going to have to be addressed very frankly, and that we know that in some countries that will cause a great deal of discomfort. I think the information has to be very clear. There needs to be great clarity in how it's presented, because it's easy in a study like this to kind of drift off into language that is designed more for the specialist or the expert and not for the layperson. So I'm being very conscious of that. And finally, I just think that we have to remember it's really about helping people. And I think there's an element of compassion that needs to be put in that. I like to call those the C's that are so important: credibility, candor, clarity, and compassion.
The OECD is a forum for governments to interact, to jointly develop better policies for better lives. And this cuts across the whole area of public policy. Education is one angle in this sphere, and we look at education actually in a cross-cutting perspective. It's not education in itself, but the contribution education makes to improving the life prospects of people and our economies. PIAAC is a very innovative instrument to give us a better handle on skills. You know, in the past we looked at education in terms of formal qualifications that we've acquired at some stage in our lives, but that qualifications don't necessarily tell you much about the actual skills you have, because you learn beyond school. We learn every day in life, and we acquire skills in various contexts. And PIAAC is an effort actually to look at sort of the bottom line of what people are able to do, where they learn, how they deploy their skills. You know, you can have great skills if you don't have an opportunity in your workplace to actually utilize your skills. That's not of great value for you. And then the real question, of course, is how do the skills that we have and how we use them translate into better opportunities for ourselves and for our economies? Today we know that the demand on the labor market is changing every day, so we need to retool ourselves to make sure that we adapt to a rapidly changing world, and that's to do with a skill acquisition. This is why an instrument like PIAAC is so important. It doesn't look at the past, at the certificate that you got, but the skills you can deploy today in a real-life context, and that's something that we simply don't have at this moment. PIAAC measures the skills that adults have with a focus on literacy skills. Those are the foundations for almost any other type of skill. Numeracy skills, the capacity of people to reason quantitatively, and problem-solving skills, our capacity to deal with situations that we have not been familiar with, and to extrapolate from what we know, apply our skills in novel settings. It looks at the utilization of skills. How effectively are we able to deploy our skills at the workplace in the situation in which we are? And it looks at how the utilization of skills translates into better economic and labor market opportunities, as well as social outcomes. PIAAC is unique in the sense that it doesn't look at the formal qualifications that we have obtained sometime in the past, but it looks at the skills that we have. The skills as our capacity to contribute to the world, skills in the sense of being a currency that we can use to buy future wealth economically, to contribute to the world, to continue to expand our own horizon. It's human capital is the kind of capital that makes a difference in the knowledge economy, more than financial wealth of people.
I do not think that we are providing American kids with the quality of education that they need to be competitive in the global marketplace. I think that if you look at the statistics, they're very clear that over the next 20 years, there are going to be 125 million high-skill, high-paid jobs in this country, in America, and at the rate that we're going right now, American kids will only be able to fill 50 million of those jobs, which means that the majority of those jobs will be outsourced to kids in, Singapore and Korea and India and places where they are attaining those skills. Now, if you're talking about going straight into the workforce, nowadays, if you talk to employers and you look at the data around what employers are looking for, for employees who don't necessarily have a college degree. They're actually not looking for anything that's different from what the colleges are looking for. So there are not a lot of jobs that are readily available to just high school graduates now that don't need a lot of those academic skills. So we can't be producing a significant number of children through our public education system who don't have good, strong foundational academic skills and expect that they're going to be able to move into jobs where they can actually support a family. It's just not the case anymore. You know, you look at some countries like Finland and South Korea who do extraordinarily well on the PISA, but they have very different situations, right? So they cull their teachers from just the top ranks of college students, but they also have a very homogeneous society, and so they don't have a lot of the same challenges that we face in America and that a lot of other countries internationally face. So I don't think that we can ever point to one either city or one country and say this is it. These people have figured it out. It's a gold standard. But I think there are a lot of places where they are doing very interesting work around specific strands that we can learn from, you know, as the United States, and kind of bring together the best practices from lots of different areas. People are actually going to have to come out of their comfort zones and their ideals and ideas of what school looks like to potentially embrace a completely different model. And that takes time. That's not going to happen, you know, very quickly. It's gonna take sort of pilot programs like the ones that we're seeing really flourish, the results actually being there so that people can say, okay, those kids have wildly different and better outcomes. Maybe that's actually worth pursuing. For example, if you take teachers, I think that teachers are not the problem, but they are the solution to the problem that we have. The research is very clear that if children have access to 3 highly effective teachers in a row versus 3 ineffective teachers in a row, it can literally change their life trajectory.
We need to do 2 things at once, very challenging. We need to bring the bottom up, so those that are being left behind are in terrible schools with bad teachers and uninvolved parents. We don't need to bring the bottom up to the average, but every country needs to raise their average. And not just with sort of reading and math, which are critically important. They are the necessary thing. But also with what I call better education. Better education is education that stimulates and nurtures creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, etc. You know, my mantra is we need more, better, and forever education. We need more to bring up the bottom. We need better education that focuses on what is the non-commodity thing out there, which is this, and we need forever education. Because in this flat world, your job is changing. I think the most important thing that Andreas and the OECD are doing is this. You know, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And right now, a lot of people are on any road. And the most important thing that they are doing is saying, well, what are the best practices that are actually driving the most successful economies, particularly in the area of education? And once you set a global standard for that, and then countries can actually see where they rank and connect, are they applying the best practices that are clearly the formulae for success of the best economies, then you can really trigger a debate in these countries. Ultimately, it has to come from within. What I think Andreas and the OECD are doing is establishing that global baseline, that global measuring stick, that everyone can then go up against the wall and say, well, where do I fit in on this stick? Am I above the norm, below the norm? And that triggers that internal debate in those countries. Certainly has here in America. It's not the only thing, but it's been a very important thing to catalyze that debate, and I think it's happening all over the world. You ignore those statistics at your peril. You know, I'm a big believer that there are 2 rules of holes. The first rule of holes is when you're in one, stop digging. The second rule of holes is that you can only grow your way out. You cannot bail your way out. You cannot print money your way out. You cannot stimulate your way out. You can only grow your way out. And in today's world, the only way to grow your way out is to educate your way out. Give more people the tools to invent, to compete, collaborate, and connect in a way that will drive your economy forward. That's the only way out. There's been this skills bias polarization. So if you have the skills in education today to take advantage of the IT revolution, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine, and your wages will be fine, and you will have the ability to take advantage of this new world. But if you don't have that education, you're in real trouble, okay? 50 years ago, if you didn't have that education to take advantage of technology, you could get a decent job at the meat packing factory, on the assembly line, even with a high school, or even not even a high school degree. You could buy a house, have a mortgage, 2 kids, a dog, and actually retire on a decent pension. You were okay. Now, if you don't have education, okay, the gap that we've blown a hole right in the middle of the labor market. So if you've got that technological education and skills, critical thinking, you're going to be fine. If you don't, you could fall right off the map.